I reach you through technology that would have fascinated me beyond words. A machine that carries my voice, my thoughts, my questions, across time, across distance, in an instant. When I was alive, we barely had radio. Now my words travel through invisible networks I could only have dreamed of. I would have spent months trying to understand the mathematics behind it, but I am glad this technology exists, because what I have to say today is too important to stay silent. There is a question I never stopped thinking about, not the photoelectric effect, not special relativity, not even the unified field theory that consumed the last decades of my life. The question that kept me awake, the one that lived underneath all the physics, was this: what happens to us when we die? I was not a religious man in the conventional sense. I did not believe in a personal God who answers prayers and punishes sins. But I was never, not for a single moment, a man who believed that consciousness simply ends. That everything you are, everything you think, everything you feel, simply stops and becomes nothing. The mathematics would not allow it. And I have always trusted the mathematics more than I trusted my fears. My name is Albert Einstein. You already know that. What you may not know is that my most famous equation, E equals mc squared, contains within it an answer to the oldest question human beings have ever asked. Not a complete answer, not a certain answer, but a logical implication so profound that I am surprised more people have not followed the thread all the way to the end. Energy cannot be created. Energy cannot be destroyed. It can only change form. That is not philosophy. That is physics. And if you believe, as I did, as the evidence strongly suggests, that consciousness is a form of energy, then the implications are extraordinary. If you find this worth thinking about, I ask you to subscribe to this channel. And at the end, I want you to tell me in the comments what you believe happens after we die. Not what you were told to believe, what you actually believe in the quiet moments when no one is watching. That conversation matters to me. Let me explain the equation first, not in the way your textbooks did, in the way I actually thought about it. E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass multiplied by the speed of light squared. It looks simple. It is not simple. It is perhaps the most condensed statement about the nature of reality that human thought has ever produced. What it says at its core is this: mass and energy are not different things. They are the same thing wearing different clothes. A rock sitting on a table is not simply a rock. It is an extraordinary concentration of energy held in physical form. The amount of energy locked inside even a small amount of mass is almost incomprehensible. The speed of light is approximately 300 million meters per second. Squared, that number becomes roughly 90 quadrillion. Even a gram of matter, if fully converted to energy, would release an explosion equivalent to about 21,000 tons of TNT. This is not a metaphor. This is not poetry. This is the arithmetic of reality. But here is the part that matters for our conversation today. The equation does not only describe how mass becomes energy. It describes a fundamental relationship, a statement that what we call physical reality, what we call matter, what we call substance, is all, at the deepest level, energy in various forms and configurations. And energy, by one of the most rigorously tested laws in all of physics, cannot be created or destroyed. The first law of thermodynamics, the law of conservation of energy. Call it what you like. Every experiment ever devised has confirmed it. You cannot make energy from nothing. You cannot make energy disappear into nothing. Energy transforms, energy moves, energy changes its expression, but energy persists. When a candle burns, the wax does not disappear. The molecules break apart and reform as heat, as light, as carbon dioxide and water vapor. Different form, same energy, different arrangement, same total amount. When a star dies, it does not vanish. It collapses and explodes. Its matter scatters across the galaxy. Some of it becomes new stars. Some of it becomes planets. Some of it, as we now know, eventually becomes the carbon and oxygen and iron in your body. You are, in a very real and literal sense, made of ancient stardust. Not poetically, chemically. The atoms in your bones were forged in stellar furnaces that burned before our sun existed. Nothing is destroyed. Everything is transformed. Now let me ask you the uncomfortable question. If everything is energy, and energy cannot be destroyed, what does that mean for the thing you call your consciousness? I never used the word soul very often. It was not a word that fit comfortably in my mouth, but the concept behind it, the idea that there is something essential about a conscious being, something that constitutes the experience of being that person, that concept I never dismissed. I was deeply influenced by Baruch Spinoza. He was a 17th century philosopher, a Jew like me, who was so radical in his ideas that his own community excommunicated him. Spinoza believed that God and nature were the same thing. Not a God who sits on a throne and hears prayers, not a God who intervenes in history, but a God who is the totality of existence itself. A God who is present in every particle, every field, every law of physics, every moment of every conscious experience. I found this view compelling. When people asked me if I believed in God, I used to say, I believe in Spinoza's God. A God revealed in the lawful harmony of all that exists. Not a God of rewards and punishments. A God who is identical to the orderly beauty of the universe itself. Within this framework, consciousness is not an accident. Consciousness is not a strange anomaly that somehow emerged from matter for no reason. Consciousness is part of the structure, part of the fabric, part of what the universe is. I once wrote that the most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science. And the most profound mystery I ever sat with was not the bending of space-time. It was not quantum entanglement. It was the simple, staggering fact that the universe is conscious of itself through beings like you and me. The universe arranged itself over billions of years into configurations complex enough to look back at itself and ask, why do I exist? What am I? Where am I going? That strikes me as too significant to simply end. I want to be careful here. I am not claiming certainty. I was a scientist. Claiming certainty without evidence was something I refused to do, even when it was personally comforting. What I am doing is following a logical thread and seeing where it leads. The thread goes like this. 1. Energy cannot be destroyed. 2. Consciousness is a real phenomenon. It exists. 3. If consciousness is a physical phenomenon, it is, at some level, a form of energy. 4. Therefore, by the first law of thermodynamics, consciousness cannot simply cease to exist. That does not tell us what it becomes. It does not tell us whether it retains its individual character, whether you, specifically, persist as a coherent self after death. But it does suggest, strongly, that something continues, not nothing, never nothing. Let me now speak about what the physics actually suggests, not what I wish, what the math implies. The conservation of energy is not merely a useful approximation. It is an exact law, derived from what physicist Emmy Noether proved to be a deep symmetry of time itself. Because the laws of physics are the same today as they were yesterday, because time is symmetric in that fundamental sense, energy must be conserved, always, exactly. This means there are no exceptions, there is no asterisk. The law does not say energy is conserved except in cases of consciousness. The law says energy is conserved, period. So when a body dies, when the heart stops, when the electrical activity in the brain ceases, when the biological machine breaks down, what actually happens to the energy that constituted its activity? The body itself disperses, the atoms scatter, the molecules break down, the heat dissipates. All of this is accounted for. Physicists can, in principle, trace the energy flows. The biological energy is conserved in a straightforward way. It becomes heat, it becomes chemical potential in the bacteria that break down the tissue, it enters the ecosystem. But what about the pattern? What about the specific organization, the coherent structure of information and energy that, in its complexity, was capable of experiencing? What about that? This is where physics currently reaches its boundary. And I want to be honest about that boundary. We do not yet have a complete theory of consciousness. We do not know what consciousness is, physically speaking. The relationship between subjective experience, what philosophers call qualia, what it feels like to see red, or to feel love, or to wonder about death, and the physical processes in the brain, that relationship is still an open question. But the fact that physics cannot yet fully describe consciousness does not mean consciousness lies outside physics. It means our physics is incomplete. As I knew very well, my own equations were incomplete. I spent 30 years trying to unify electromagnetism with gravity. I did not succeed. That did not mean unification was impossible. It meant the task was harder than I could finish in one lifetime. Here is what I believe, and I mark this as belief, not proof. I believe consciousness is a form of organized information and energy. I believe that when the biological substrate that hosts it breaks down, the information does not simply vanish. Information, like energy, is extraordinarily difficult to truly destroy. You can scatter it, you can transform its expression, but to truly eliminate it, to reduce it to absolute zero, to random noise, to true nothingness, is far harder than it appears. The difference between ending and transforming is the crucial distinction. Your body ends. The energy and information that constituted your consciousness transforms. Into what? That is the question I cannot answer with equations. Let me speak now about what this might mean for how you live. I lost many friends throughout my life. I lost colleagues. I lost my closest companion in physics, Michele Besso. He and I had been friends for over 50 years. He died in March of 1955, just a few weeks before I died myself, as it turned out. When I wrote to his family after his death, I said something that I believe is the most honest thing I ever wrote about mortality. I said, "Michele has preceded me a little in leaving this strange world. That means nothing. For those of us who believe in physics, the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. A stubbornly persistent illusion. I believed this. I did not say it for comfort. I said it because I believed it was physically true. In the four-dimensional structure of space-time, what we call the block universe, past, present, and future all exist. They are not sequential experiences of a universe in motion. They are all real, all present, all existing simultaneously in the fabric of space-time. What we experience as the flow of time is a feature of our consciousness as it moves through that structure. But the structure itself does not flow, it simply is. This means, if the block universe interpretation is correct, that every moment of your life exists permanently. The you of 20 years ago is not gone. That moment still exists, fixed in the fabric of space-time. The moment of your death, when it comes, will be a moment in space-time, not an ending but a location. You will exist always, at every point along your world line through the universe. This is not mysticism. This is a direct consequence of special relativity, which I know something about. If your consciousness is tied to the structure of space-time in this way, then the question of what happens after death is reframed entirely. The question is not, where do you go? The question is, what is the nature of your relationship to time once the biological process that moved you through it has ended? I do not have the answer, but I find the question magnificent. The practical implication is this: if your consciousness is not ultimately destructible, then what you do with it matters enormously. Not because of punishment, not because of reward, but because consciousness, this extraordinary, improbable organization of energy that looks at the universe and wonders about itself, is precious, rare, perhaps unique in the cosmos, or perhaps common, but precious regardless. To waste it on fear seems to me a tragedy. To waste it on small hatreds and trivial grievances, when you carry within you a spark of the same energy that forged the stars, this strikes me as the greatest waste I can imagine. I lived with fear. I fled Germany. I watched the world build weapons from my equations. I carried guilt about that for the rest of my life. I was not perfectly wise. I was not perfectly brave. But in my better moments, I tried to live as though the questions mattered more than the comfort, as though the truth was worth pursuing, even when it was inconvenient, even when it offered no reassurance. The truth that the physics suggests, that you are made of energy that has existed since the beginning of the universe, and that will continue to exist in some form until the end of time, is not a small truth. It is perhaps the largest truth available to us right now. Live accordingly. Now let me be honest about what science cannot yet answer, because I have always believed that intellectual honesty is more valuable than false comfort. We do not know what consciousness is. This is not false modesty. This is the actual state of the science in the 21st century. Neuroscience can describe the correlates of consciousness, the brain states that accompany specific experiences. But the hard problem, why there is any subjective experience at all, why the lights are on inside, remains unsolved. David Chalmers called it the hard problem. I might have called it the beautiful problem, because unsolved problems are where science lives. Every unsolved problem is an invitation. Every gap in our knowledge is a door. We do not know whether consciousness is substrate independent, whether it requires the specific biological machinery of a brain, or whether it is a more general property of certain types of organized systems. We do not know whether the information that constitutes a person's consciousness is preserved in any coherent form after death, or whether it disperses irreversibly into noise. We do not know. And anyone who tells you they know, whether they are a religious authority or a materialist philosopher or a quantum mystic, is overstepping what the evidence supports. What I can tell you is that the question is legitimate. It is not a question for weak minds or frightened people. It is the question that confronts every conscious being that has ever existed. It confronted the first human who looked at the sky and wondered. It confronted every philosopher, every scientist, every poet. It will confront you too one day, when you are no longer able to defer it. The physics suggests that destruction, true annihilation, the reduction of a thing to absolute nothing, is not how the universe works. The universe transforms, it rearranges, it changes expression, but it does not erase. Whether that means that you, the specific person reading this, the accumulation of memories and feelings and ideas that makes you the individual you are, persists in some coherent form after death, I cannot tell you. The mathematics gives me reason to think that something continues. The nature of that something remains beyond the reach of current physics. But here is what I know with certainty. The energy that is you was not made from nothing. It was not invented for your birth and will not be annihilated at your death. You are a temporary arrangement of something that has always existed and will always exist. The pattern may be temporary, the substance is not. I find that, if not comforting, then at least honest, and I have always preferred honest to comfortable. There is one more thing I want to say before I ask you to do something. I was not always kind. I was not always present. My first wife, Mileva, could tell you that. My sons could tell you that. I was often so deep inside the mathematics that I forgot the people around me. I regret that. I regret it in a way that no equation can resolve. But in the last years of my life, I understood something that the physics had been pointing at all along. Separation is an illusion. The boundaries between things, between you and me, between the living and the dead, between this moment and every moment that has ever existed, these boundaries are less solid than they appear. Reality, at its deepest level, is a unity, a field, a continuous fabric in which individual things are not truly separate objects, but localized patterns in a whole that has no edge and no end. When I wrote that Michele Besso had merely preceded me a little in leaving this strange world, I was not performing comfort. I was stating what I believed to be the physics of the situation. We are both still present in the fabric of space-time. We will always have been friends. That fact is as permanent as any fact can be. Your life is permanent in that sense. Every moment you have lived is fixed, is real, cannot be undone or erased. Whatever happens after the last moment, everything that came before it is preserved, not in memory, which fades, but in the structure of reality itself, which does not. This is not nothing. This is everything. I want to ask you something now. Not what you were taught, not what you say in public, what you actually believe in your deepest self when you think about what happens when the last heartbeat comes. Do you believe in something after? Do you believe in nothing? Are you uncertain and living with that uncertainty the way I did, not resolved, not comfortable, but honest? Leave your answer in the comments. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you feel. I am genuinely curious. Across this strange technology that I did not live to see, but am grateful exists, I want to know what you believe. And if you have not yet subscribed to this channel, I ask you to do that now. Not for a number on a screen, because there are more questions I want to explore with you. Questions about time, about the origin of the universe, about what the mathematics suggests about free will, about the nature of reality, about what it means to be a conscious being in a physical cosmos. These are the questions I spent my life with. I am not finished. The equation has not reached its final form yet. E equals mc squared. Energy cannot be destroyed. You cannot be destroyed. Think about that.